Something came from Baltimore. Something came from Baltimore.
Welcome to Something Came From Baltimore. My name is Tom Gouker, and I am your host for the day. Something Came From Baltimore is a jazz, blues, and R&B podcast and radio show, and it's not really about Baltimore. This week, it is about Baltimore, and I have the pleasure to speak to one of the good guys in jazz. It's Todd Marcus. And if you've been following Something Came From Baltimore only, you may remember that Todd Marcus was featured on the Hey Baltimore series, where we showcased all the superstar talent that is based in the Baltimore area. Todd Marcus plays the bass clarinet, and yes, he is local, and yes, he does have a worldwide reach. He has just released a new recording on July 1st, 2022, and it's called In the Valley with the Todd Marcus Jazz Orchestra. Todd Marcus was born and raised in New Jersey, and his father was born in Egypt, and this is the major theme of In the Valley. The songs are inspired by various trips to Egypt, learning the culture and absorbing it. While Todd Marcus is a jazz star traveling around the world, he is also involved in a Baltimore nonprofit called Intersection of Change, and that link is in the show notes. We're almost ready to get into that interview with Todd Marcus, but before we do, remember to subscribe, listen, and to share the podcast with others. Just recently, something happened to me that I want to share with you. I have a couple of friends and family who want me to know that they have subscribed to Something Came From Baltimore, which is very cool. But then I just looked at their phone and I found out there was 240 episodes that have been unplayed. Subscribing is awesome, but help the podcaster out and actually play the show. I think that these shows are pretty good. And if you're not really into the artist, just play the podcast with the volume down at 3.5 speed. Now, if you had a podcast, I would do that for you. Like the Rolling Stone podcast, the Questlove Supreme podcast, I'm not worried about them. They have organizations that support their shows and provide advertisement revenue. And I don't have that. I think we're good now. So that's my story here. I hope you keep the volume up for our guest today. It's Todd Marcus Jazz Orchestra. The album's called In the Valley, and I don't want you to miss it. Let's listen to a segment of the song, which is also the name of the album, called In the Valley. Todd Marcus, welcome to Something Came From Baltimore.
Good to be with you. I'm a regular listener of the podcast, and so it's good to be talking about my current project as well.
Yeah, it's great to have you. We had you before last year with the Hey Baltimore series. The most important thing that we need to talk about as interview from last year is your love for Star Trek. There's 5 new kind of Star Trek shows that are out in the world recently. So I know you, with the pandemic, you were able to catch up on old ones and kind of watch the ones that you liked over again. So I'm going to ask for thumbs up, thumbs down on these new projects. Just tell me if it's something worth watching or you passed on it. Yeah, Lower Decks.
I have not gone the cartoon route, so staying on that front. Cannot comment.
No comment. Picard.
Oh, man. I was so happy when that was coming out, and the first season, it was kind of an adjustment because it's so different in tone from the original Next Generation, and I appreciate and respect that they wanted to make it something different and unique. And Patrick Stewart, he did not want to come back and just do a rehash, a reboot of the Next Generation. So, the first season was okay, but this second season, oh boy, it's been so rough. hopefully season 3 closes out with an upswing.
How about Discovery?
I have started Discovery. I'm about 10 episodes in. I was worried about some of the kind of those similar qualities, but I'm enjoying that. I'm taking a little bit at a time, and so far so good.
Strange New Worlds.
Well, Strange New Worlds is one that I probably have the most optimism for because it goes back to the episodic kind of approach and more the explorer type of approach. But I decided that on counsel from one of my close Trekkie friends that I would watch Discovery first for the introduction of Captain Pike. I am waiting on Strange New Worlds until I finish up Discovery.
Anticipated thumbs up. The feedback is positive. Prodigy.
That's another one of the cartoon ones. So I think I'll have to get desperate before I go cartoon route for Star Trek.
That was pretty cool is that you sent me your album. So I was able to read the liner notes, which kind of was like a travel log as to what you were doing, but also what the music is. So it kind of went together. There's a mention about the Middle Eastern music, traditional music, and jazz are kind of at odds because jazz is more harmony based, where the Middle Eastern is like a focus on unison themes. Does that mean like repetition?
No, it just means like you had all the instruments or voices all singing the same part instead of singing or playing harmony parts. That's where you see very dominantly in Middle Eastern music that kind of approach, whereas in jazz, so much of it is identified by the kind of harmony that we love, very rich, lots of different chord qualities. So that's the difference, the nuance there.
Never knew that these pyramids are visible, like kind of in downtown Cairo, like where it's in the backdrop. Like somehow I thought this is an American person not knowing their stuff, that all like pyramids were kind of out in a desert area.
Well, you're right. The pyramids are visible for miles throughout Cairo. I mean, it's actually Giza, which is essentially part of Cairo. It's about 20 million plus people, and you can see it all throughout. And that was why I wanted to capture that. It's on the cover. It's just, to me, it's such an iconic experience of being in the city where you can be just driving around doing errands, and then you look up, oh, there's these ancient, massive pyramids looming above us. One of the iconic things is the 5 times a day, the call to prayer from the minarets and the mosques. And that's just, in addition to all that you're seeing happening visually with people walking around and traffic, then you have that audio element because it rings out throughout the city. And even the air's got a certain smell. Every time that I go back to Egypt and I land in the airport and get off the plane, there's a certain smell to the air, that desert air, that it's just very nostalgic to me. And immediately, it's the first thing that strikes me to say, okay, I'm here, I'm back.
This recording was recorded in 2019. You basically sat on this for 3 years. Did you wait for the pandemic to, go away and felt like, okay, this is better? Now, a lot of people release stuff during the pandemic, but they couldn't perform it. So they feel like they kind of got gypped, Yeah,
that's a big part of it. We recorded this, like you said, June of 2019. We had a little tour that month, and then we went to the studio and recorded while everything was really tight. And I got on a plane the next day and went to a performance in Italy. Came back and was very much in the throes of my previous record, which is called Trio Plus, and was working on promoting that record and performances lined up. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. Mm-hmm. And so much of what I was working on for Trio Plus as an album just got obliterated. I used the time to start then getting things ready for this new record, In the Valley. But I didn't see any point in trying to release it during a pandemic because, you want to be able to perform, to promote it, and to celebrate it. I'll tell you, the other thing that has factored in is that even though the music was recorded already back in 2019, it took a long time for some of the other elements. And you mentioned that album cover and even several of the photos inside that also capture Egypt and were so integral to the musical and visual portrait that I wanted to. I feel like the result is music that I think is my finest work to date, and an album with the packaging and the photography and the liner notes that is very significant. And I appreciate you focusing on those things, because so often now, with just minimal number of people that actually buy or get the actual album, you you don't get the chance for them to see that, right? I mean, they'll see the cover, but all that other interior work and context, that's one of the challenges for us as musicians, is that when people don't get the CD or the LP, that they miss out on all that.
We're going to get into this album. So it's In the Valley. It's the Todd Jazz Orchestra. The release date is July 1st, 2022. It's on the Stricker Street Records. Horus is an Egyptian deity. A lot of people have seen this through the years, where it's a head of a falcon and a body of a man. And in my opinion, this is the most obvious blend of jazz and Middle Eastern music in an orchestra setting.
To your point, this is the most overtly Middle Eastern sound composition on the record. And the last record I did with this Todd Jazz Orchestra was in 2015, called Blues for Tahrir, and that had a lot of the compositions that very much incorporated the Middle Eastern sound. On this record, this tune, Horus, is the one that you're going to hear most prominently, whereas some of the other compositions are more inspired by these recent trips back to Egypt, that don't necessarily all use the Middle Eastern scales and whatnot, but more just kind of an artist's interpretation of experience and travels over recent years.
The second song, The Hive, a look at the modern day Cairo. It looks like chaos to people who are, not from that area, Americans, but it's actually equated to a beehive, where it looks like chaos, but obviously it's organized also. And then, okay, now that I know this, I'm like, I kind of hear some like fluttering in the sax, where it does feel like I may be tripping.
So with the Hive, the moments where those flourishes, like you say, take place. But then even when we look at a composition like Cairo Street Ride, there's the inspiration that it very much was written after getting into a cab in Cairo, and the cab driver had the radio on, and some classical Middle Eastern music was playing, and so there's a thread of that which reflects literally what I transcribed, because I had recorded a little clip on my phone, and then I went back and transcribed that motif. So there's these points, like you said, where you're not tripping. You're hearing right that I worked all that in there.
We are going to play the Cairo Street Ride. You can hear like the revving. It feels like a revving of a car, like switching gears. It's really cool.
Years ago, I heard the great trombonist Frank Lacey, mainstay of the New York scene for many years, and he does something on trombone we call it the race car, where he'll start at the lowest notes of the trombone and he'll go and work all the way up to the high end of the instrument. That always stuck with me as just a brilliant technique. And so when I was writing this composition and arranging it, I said, oh man, that's an opportunity to incorporate the Frank Lacey into this composition, to have the imagery of that cab speeding up as it's driving through Cairo.
Final Days. I know you're a Star Trek fan. In my mind, I can hear like the intro or outro of the original Star Trek in it. And there's, because I know that you wanted to put that in there somewhere. The overall theme you're going to talk about.
Funny you mentioned the Star Trek kind of imagery or the sound of it. I think you're right. The opening kind of has some of those same intervals, and it's funny. I don't think that was consciously in my mind when I wrote it, but I definitely hear what you're talking about, and even thinking about just that moment when I was at my family's house that last time, and thinking about it being the final days there, and reflecting on all the memories and growing up there. And one of those components was being exposed to Star Trek and watching Star Trek: The Next Generation. So it's nice that you hear that, because I think you're right. That's all in there. And sometimes as musicians, there are things that we don't even realize that come through they're definitely at play. Kind of a different composition than the others. I mean, certainly that it's a slow piece, it's a ballad. It doesn't have the Middle Eastern influences on that one. So yeah, I think it is the kind of a transition and a segue in a lot of ways. And certainly just that it was a reflection on a transitionary time in my life a couple of years ago, with following the death of my dad and my mom putting the house up for sale, and that close of a big part of my life. I mean, I've been fortunate to have had that stability where I grew up in that house, and it was where my family was for 40 plus years. So definitely a transitionary composition and presence inspiring that.
The album's called In the Valley. It's Todd Marcus Jazz Orchestra. Coming out July 1st. He's right. This is a really strong album. I hope I can see your future where you dabble into this a little more.
Thank you, Tom. We really appreciate the time to talk. And as I said, enjoy being a listener and hope other folks will enjoy learning about this record that we've got coming out.
I hope you enjoyed the interview today with Todd Marcus. And don't forget his nonprofit called Intersection of Change. The link is in the show notes. Subscribe, share, and play the podcast with the volume up or volume down. The show is over. Have a great day.